I am in agreement that the hatchet or pocket axe is not to be without in the outdoors, as Nessmuk has stated in Woodcraft and Camping. This is an interesting topic because opinions vary so much on the importance of a hatchet and what qualities make a hatchet satisfactory. So let's begin by taking a look at the hatchet that Nessmuk spoke so highly of, the double bit pocket axe. This particular hatchet, made by the Marbles Company, I believe is of comparable size and shape to the one Nessmuk wrote about. Perhaps it's slightly smaller, but I still think it gives a fair idea of how his hatchet performed. He states his preference for the double bit due to the edges being able to serve different purposes. One edge is thick and stunt, able to handle the abusive tasks such as cutting through thick tree knots or deer bones, and the other is a fine, keen edge for clean cuts in timber. I purchased this hatchet about 5 years ago, and upon receiving it, I was surprised to see that the edges matched what Nessmuk wrote about. One edge is thicker, and I put a steeper bevel on it, and the other edge is thinner with a finer bevel. Now, like I said, I purchased this hatchet about 5 years ago, and I paid $60 for it. And at the time, I thought that was quite a bit of money to be spending on such a small tool. I wasn't even sure with its small size if it was going to be usable, and if it was usable, if it would even be effective in the outdoors. But this is one of the more humorous parts from Woodcraft and Camping. Nessmuk is going into detail the lengths that he went to get his double bit pocket axe. And some of his witty friends wrote up a receipt kind of poking fun at his business abilities. And this book was written it was first published in 1884. And he wrote here regarding this receipt that his friends wrote out, "I will copy the statement as it stands today on paper yellow with age, for I have kept it over 40 years. Which means they wrote it 40 years prior, at least 40 years prior to this book being published. So 1880s this was published, so we'll say about the 1840s perhaps is when that receipt was written. But they poke fun at it, listing the cost of the blade, the fare on the boat, expenses for 3 days, 3 days lost time, and 2 days making the model, the handle, and the sheath. And their total comes to $12.75. Nessmuk corrects it, saying that he didn't pay quite that much. The total was actually $10.75. I went online and looked up what that would cost in today's world. $10.75 back in the 1840s runs about $400 today. So the fact that he went through such lengths and paid so much money to get his small pocket axe should indicate just how important to him it was to have such a tool in the outdoors. So on paper, the way that Nessmuk writes about it in Woodcraft and Camping, it sounds like a very capable tool. But what is it like to actually use? I've spent a fair amount of time in the outdoors using this hatchet in camps, gathering and processing wood, carving, and I feel I have a pretty fair understanding of its capabilities and also its shortcomings. First off, this particular model is a very light hatchet. I can't say for certain how heavy the one Nessmuk used was. In his book, he refers to a 2-pound hand axe as being clumsy, so I think it's safe to say his was less than 2 pounds. If I had to guess, I'd say his was probably around the 1 pound mark, perhaps even 1¼ pounds, but likely not heavier than that, since maintaining a lightweight kit was of such high importance to him. And that is one of the benefits of this hatchet. It is very lightweight. Compared to the hatchet that I've been using recently, this one here, this hatchet, its head weighs 1¾ pounds, so it's a whole pound heavier than this little double bit hatchet. And having them side by side and feeling them, it actually makes me question whether or not that extra weight is even beneficial to have around camp. This little double bit is capable of chopping, and it's no big job to chop through a tree 6 or 8 inches in diameter. It can clip limbs with ease. It's quite suitable for carving, and it can split down wood into kindling and even feather that kindling into a fine tinder. I can say with full confidence that this hatchet is a capable camp tool. At first appearance, it certainly seems to be too small to be of any real function, but it does handle camp chores quite nicely. Of course, though, it does have its limitations and drawbacks. First off, it is a very small hatchet. You can see just how small it is. And compared to this hatchet here, which I've used a lot and done a lot of work with, this one is 1¼ pounds. You can see the bit size. This little hatchet only has 2.5-inch bits, so very, very tiny. So that means for chopping larger wood or trying to get your way through thick, dense wood or dense branches, you're going to have to spend more time and take more swings to be able to get through those pieces of wood. Another drawback is the shorter handle. That's not really a drawback of the hatchet itself, more just this particular model. I would prefer if this was probably another 4 inches longer. The main reason is when you go to chop, it's really nice to have two hands on the handle, but if you put two hands on this handle, you are running out of real estate real quick, and when you're chopping that close to your handle, it's just not very effective. So if I could get another hand grab down here and have that extra space for swinging, I think that'd be a lot better. Another drawback, and probably the most notable, is that since it's a double bit, it doesn't have a pole, which is the hammer on the back of the hatchet. Now the reason why that is a big deal, a lot of people complain that they can't pound tent stakes or do any type of pounding with that pole when they're wielding a double bit. For me, that's not that big of an issue. It's very simple to go and chop a 2-foot pole, maybe 2 inches in diameter, and use it as a club to pound stakes into the ground. Or you could even turn the hatchet sideways and be able to pound like that. More so, the disadvantage of not having a pole is when it comes to trying to accurately split wood. When you have a pole, you can place your axe on that wood, beat it with a baton, and split the piece of wood very accurately. Again, this mostly comes in handy with wood carving, which I do a lot of. So not having that pole for me is a big disadvantage. Of course, there is workarounds. You can use wood wedges and a baton to split down the wood, but it can be inconvenient to have to do that every time you want to make an accurate split. I truly believe that this is one of those tools where you either really like it or you really don't. If you can get past not having a pole on your hatchet and you can really embrace the double bits, I think it's a great little tool to use. Now, personally, I would like to perhaps try to find one. They are rather uncommon. They're more of a specialty tool, but if I could find one that was just a little bit bigger, maybe even that 1.25 pound range, and had bits that were a little bit bigger, I think that would make for just about the perfect camp tool. And I suppose now would be a good time to discuss exactly what my preferences are when it comes to picking a hatchet. I'll begin by talking about weight, which is quite important when it comes to selecting your hatchet, and everyone's going to have their own preference. This hatchet here, for me, it feels a little bit light. I like to have a little bit more weight behind my swings, which comes in handy for chopping and splitting. These two hatchets here are both 1.25 pound, and I think that this is the sweet spot for me. This hatchet has gone through a lot through the years, and the 1.25 pound weight really seems to work well for me. It's got enough weight behind it that it's effective at chopping and splitting, but it's also light enough that it's comfortable in the hand for long carving periods. This hatchet here, being 1.75 pound, I can definitely tell when I'm using this one that it has more weight behind it, which it's nice for swinging at trees, chopping, and splitting wood, but when it comes to the finer camp tasks of carving, it definitely is a little bit cumbersome and not quite as nice to use as something like this that's a bit lighter. Next, we'll talk about the profile of the blade, the edge profile. You can see most of these hatchets here all have a curved edge, and I really do prefer a curved edge. A nice gentle curve, nothing too crazy. This one here is about as far as I would go. And the nice curve lends itself to being just a good functional tool. I do have this one here that has a straight edge, and this hatchet is specifically for wood carving, hence the short handle. It's a one-handed tool meant for carving wood. It only has a bevel on one side, so I can chop at a really low angle, but it has a straight edge, and I find that these harsh corners are quite a nuisance when you're carving. A lot of times they'll catch the piece of wood and leave little nicks in the piece of wood, and I'm probably going to end up reprofiling this and curving the blade, because the curve is just a lot more ideal to work with, I find. Then of course we have to pay attention to edge thickness. Some of these hatchets have a very thin edge. This one here is a very thin hatchet, which is really good for carving and for chopping, but when it comes to splitting, it's less ideal. This hatchet here is relatively thick, really good for splitting, but less ideal for chopping and for carving. There is kind of a sweet spot to be found where you have a nice thickness, so the edge is still very strong, the bit is still very strong, but it's not too thick that you can't get a good edge on it and make it a usable tool for carving. So something like this one here I have used a lot, but it does not split wood very well. Not that I have to split wood all too often, but a lot of times when you are swinging at wood, this bit, because it's so thin, it will get stuck in there. So something a little bit thicker would be nice. Actually, I quite like the thickness on this double bit hatchet. It's got quite nice edges on it. On the thinner side, with the sharper edge, it's just about perfect actually. So the blade thickness does play a role in selecting your hatchet. You don't want something that's too thin, or else it's going to be weaker and it's not going to be as effective for camp tasks like splitting down wood. But you go too thick and you're going the opposite direction, it's going to be only good at splitting and less ideal for carving and other finer camp tasks. Obviously, we want a high quality steel that can be sharpened to a nice precise edge, and we want that steel to be able to hold that edge throughout using it. And last but not least is the handle. Now, the handle shape is more of a personal preference. Personally, hatchet handles are so short, I don't think that the shape of them really matters all that much, so long as it's a good size that fits comfortably in your hand. But whether it's curved or straight like this, I don't think it actually plays that big of a role in making a difference of performance. But the length is what comes into play with hatchets, and I prefer one right around, I think about 14 inches is good. You can see with this double bit, it has a very short handle. Compared with this other hatchet, you can see that we are already a few inches off there. So I think making a handle that's a little bit thicker, this one is pretty thin in the hand, but a little bit thicker of a handle, and adding a few extra inches on would turn this tool into a far more sufficient piece of kit. You obviously don't want your handle to be too long though, because once you start to carve with it, you don't want this handle coming back and sticking into you and becoming too much of a nuisance when you're doing finer camp work. So there is a sweet spot, and for me, I think right around that 13 to 14 inches is probably about good. And one last little detail about the pocket axe is the sheath. Now this one, when I bought it, it did not come with a sheath, so I simply made this a very simple sheath, basically just a pocket of leather, double stitched. I did put a little belt loop on the back side of it. It's got two leather flaps that close with some snap buttons. And this is just the simplest design I could think of that's easy to take on and off, but very simple, secure, keeps the hatchet protected, and actually works quite well. So I think Nessmuk was justified in going through such lengths to obtain his double bit pocket axe. It is a great little tool that offers a lot more functionality than one would think. If you've ever used one, let me know your thoughts on it. Let me know what you think of the double bit pocket axe. That's all I got for you today. I hope you enjoyed. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one.